And I will start by just going back one step. I think I have control. There we go. And just note that for the upcoming seminars, the one that's on the left-hand side, third down, Analytics for Strategy, Execution, Organizational Effectiveness, that's a two-day version of the content of the book. The content of the book that's spread out over a two-day program. What you're going to get here is a highlight of that, so if it feels a little bit like you're sipping from a fire hose, I apologize, but I want to be sure to go through some of the key themes, and anybody who wants to dig deeper into them, of course, there's the book, but then there's also the chance to come and spend some time together in Los Angeles with a great learning experience. Okay, so as Lacey said, we titled this with the same title as the book for good reasons. There we go. You can see the cover. It is available now for anybody who wants it. Here are the key themes of the book, and there's a lot in it. So I want to be sure to put this all up front so you can see it. And I'm going to go through these in some in more detail than others, but I want to just set it out there so we're clear. And by the way, I am happy to accept kind of questions that have people along the way. Although in this case, it may make sense for us to defer them to the end. But if anybody has an urgent question, they can send it through, and Carrie or Lacey will let me know. Okay, so the main thing that I'm addressing in this book is essentially how can you better strategy execution. The subtitle of the book is Strategy Execution Organizational Effectiveness, and they go hand in hand. And there's a reason why I chose those as the main focus, and it's because on the business side, people are always talking about the strategy, and on the people side, we frequently talk about organizational effectiveness. And part of the problem, one of the biggest problems we have in organizations, is that both of those groups, the people who work on the people side, the people who work on the business side, they're trying to accomplish the same thing overall, but they frequently aren't aligned and aren't focused on the right thing. And it starts, first and foremost, with the kinds of analytics they do. And what is the data they rely on? Where is it they get their information? What kind of sensing do they do in the organization? And that tends to color their view of what needs to take place pretty dramatically. And that also, the lack of alignment between people on the business side and people on the people side or HR side is where a lot of our problems with strategy execution tend to arise. Okay? And related to this is the way that we set organizations up. Okay? They're big, they're complex, it's hard to manage everything, so we compartmentalize. All right, we make people responsible for different parts of the production process or the services, whatever it is we're providing to our customers. And in order for people to be able to do their job, you have to give them a certain amount of responsibility. We know if we stretch people too far, they won't be able to get anything done. So everybody ends up with a well-defined set of responsibilities. The problem is that once you give people only one piece of the puzzle they're supposed to be managing, even if they're a general manager or vice president over a large part of the work, they don't have full responsibility for everything. And it's really easy to get caught up in focusing on the metrics that you're responsible for in your part of the organization, whether you're in the business or you're in HR, and to focus on how can you make what you're responsible for work even better, because that's doing your job, right? But the problem becomes, how do we make sure that we're putting the right emphasis on all the different things taking place across the organization? And that's where the problem arises of us not having enough alignment between what goes on the business side versus what goes on the people side. So this is point number 3 here. Okay. To get to the right answers, to figure out the right place to start, you've got to start with looking at the entire system. Okay, the knowledge base that I use for this book comes from a fairly long tradition of people looking at issues of organization design and diagnostics around org design. People like Peter Senge, who in the past talked about learning organizations. People have talked about systems analysis. Those are all different pieces of the puzzle that provide the right focus on looking at the entire system of what you're trying to accomplish as an organization, figuring out what it is that you need to be doing to be able to close the gaps that you have in performance for the overall system, and then that will then tell you where you want to be focusing your change efforts and further analysis to be able to really improve your strategy execution and to have org effectiveness focused in the right way. Okay. Couple points around this, which I'll emphasize towards the end. One is that there is, the dominant way that we think about evaluating something's worth within organizations is looking at ROI. But in fact, ROI is has a lot of problems with it, many of which people know. And the solution, instead of just focusing on ROI, is to focus on what are the capabilities that you need to be able to promote and improve your competitive advantage. A lot of times you need to make investments, to be able to bolster those capabilities and be able to give yourself even greater ability to make money in the long run. But those short-term investments often will mean a negative ROI. And this is where a lot of the headbutting takes place, not just between HR and finance, but even, with many of the clients that I work with, I see this happen time and time again, even amongst business leaders, where they know that they have to be investing in capabilities to be able to make the organization strong, to preserve and increase their market position. But the finance function will turn to them and say, well, show us what the ROI is of, any particular spending you want to do. And the answer is you can't prove it beyond a shadow of a doubt, which is often what finance requires. So then you don't make the investment. And that's a fundamental flaw with the way analysis and evaluation is done in organizations. And part of what I'm trying to do with this book is to help to kind of correct the course on that. A final point in all of this is and I'll come to this towards the end, there's more and more emphasis on data, lots and lots of emphasis on data. We've got big data now. We've got data scientists are probably one of the fastest growing jobs in organizations. It seems like these days if you can put data scientists in your name, you can command a nice salary and a plum job. And the insights that we're getting from people applying those kind of analytics that look at the big data sets, this more and more information we're getting on consumer buying patterns, on people's, mobile behaviors, all of that. It's all very useful, but at best, it's going to help us to be able to marginally improve operations, and at worst, it can be a big distraction away from focusing on the big gaps in strategy execution. So, like I said, I'll come to that towards the end, but I wanted to give you all a preview of where we're going to be going with the roadmap here. Okay, so the first challenge we have, the key problem that we have is that business leaders focus primarily only on the business metrics and analytics that they have at their disposal that they're responsible for. So, if this is a manufacturing, we'll have uptime, we'll have quality, we'll have waste. If this is if it's a service-based offering you're giving to your customers, it's going to be around customer service. It'll be quality of the interaction, customer retention. Whatever industry you're in. Innovation is often for many companies, innovation is a key thing that provides you a competitive advantage. Go-to-market effectiveness, whatever the key metrics are, your business leaders know what they are, and they are very good about measuring it and monitoring them. Okay? Where they tend to fall down is not understanding what goes on the people side that actually brings everybody together as a well-functioning group, if they are well-functioning, sometimes not, to produce those operational metrics that business leaders focus on. Okay? So business leaders are strong on the operational metrics, but weak on the people side. And we've got the mirror opposite on the HR side. Right? So there are people in HR, and this also applies to many frontline managers and even middle managers, they're often pretty good at being able to look and understand kind of what's going on with the people sitting within a particular work group or in a part of the organization, but don't necessarily have the ability to then make the larger links back to the strategy and to figure out, okay, if there are 1,000 different things that we could be doing to improve people and processes around here, what are the ones that are actually going to make a difference? Okay? And this is the fundamental source of the lack of alignment that we have. And there's an old parable here, which is about the different blind people touching an elephant, and it applies really well here. Okay? So, and just to kind of prove the point, here is an example from a Chinese wood carving from back around I think it's like the 12th or the 13th century. And these are blind monks who are all touching different parts of the elephant. And this just shows you how deep this problem goes in our economies, in our societies, that it's been centuries that people have recognized that if all you're doing is touching one part of the elephant and you can't see the whole creature for what it is, you're never going to be able to understand the full system. And this is exactly the parable that we have today that we're living every single day in companies around the world. Okay? The solution for this is to focus on what I'll call analytical inclusion and validation. Okay? Now, I am not saying that you want to take your business people and make them experts on the people side or on the HR side, or to make people on the HR side experts on the business. But the simple truth, and we all know this because we see it every day, is that there are those handful of people out there, and I don't care if you're talking about business leaders or HR people, there are the handful of people out there who, regardless of what hat they're wearing, they really understand what's going on the other side. And they also understand their own limitations and where it is they have to go and to get expert advice from the people on the other side of the fence. And the most important thing here is that this is not just about a business leader saying, okay, we've got a problem here with motivation or with people, with turnover, you HR go figure it out. Okay, which is often what happens. The real challenge is to come together as a group and to say, okay, well, if we have an issue with, say, turnover or motivation, what are the kinds of levers that we have to pull? What are the realistic outcomes we can expect to get? And where is it that the business needs help the most around this? It's the same thing on the HR side. Okay? HR will often look and see that there are significant issues around how people are being managed, and it is absolutely true that if we make our company a better place to work, if we improve the environment for employee engagement, then those kinds of improvements should flow to the bottom line. Okay? But I say should here, with a pretty strong emphasis. The problem is that there literally are 1,000 things you can do to improve stuff on the employee side, and probably 990 of them are ones that are nice to have, but not necessarily strategically important. Okay? Now, HR doesn't like to hear this, and particularly when it comes from somebody on the business side who says, who discounts the role of HR and what we can do with people, they'll dismiss it. They'll say, well, you just don't understand. We've got to do a better job of managing our people. And that's true in kind of in a general sense, but it's not necessarily true in a business sense. There really are a lot of things that if we didn't make improvements on the people side, yes, it would be a less nice place to work. Yes, employee engagement might be a little bit lower than it would be otherwise, but it might not matter for the actual business results. Okay? And I say this as somebody who works with HR, who says, who sees, extremely high value in what HR does, but I'm one of the biggest critics when it comes to saying that we have to be able to prioritize what are the things we're going to do in the employees that are actually going to matter. Because if we do those, then we're going to have the biggest impact possible, and that will actually create more resources and a stronger platform for, for making changes and making improvements in the future, because people will see the kind of value that HR is contributing to actually to the strategic success. And so the answer is that you need to stay within your domain of expertise. If I'm a business leader, I want to keep on focus on those operational metrics, but I need to be validating what I'm doing by working directly and closely with HR, and same thing on the other side of the fence for HR. Okay, challenge number 2. And this is one, for this challenge, people in HR and the business fall into this trap just as likely as each other. This is not just an HR thing. Okay. When we tell about how it is that we achieve performance in our organizations, we do it by starting with stories about individuals and individual jobs. Okay? If we're primarily a sales organization, then it's always going to be about the heroic sales. Even if it's a corporate sales team, we'll talk about the efforts of that team, but inevitably the one person there who had the best relationship, who's able to make the close, whatever it is, even if it's a team effort. Okay, we always focus on the individual. Same thing around innovation. There'll be particular roles, whether it's research roles or people in the development process, where they'll be given the kudos for really carrying everything through. And you can kind of fill in the blanks here with whatever the source of your competitive advantage is, and wherever it is that you can uniquely make money and carve out a space, that is somewhat safe from your competitors. There are these narratives that are out there, and then they're told by both people in the business and in HR. But the problem is that both sides are making a fundamental mistake when they do this. Okay? And the problem is that roles are interdependent. Okay? It doesn't matter how much control you have over your own job, whether you're a salesperson, call center representative, research scientist, whatever your role is. Everything that we do is dependent on other people to get it done, okay? And there are high levels of interdependency across roles within organizations. And the fundamental problem that we have when it comes to looking at organizations and understanding where it is that performance needs to improve and where we need to be making changes in the organization design and the work design is that you need to be looking at the whole process, you need to be looking at the whole system, at the entire work group to understand where things are going well and where they're not. Okay. This is the same analogy about improvements on the people side. When we're talking about improvements in business processes, there are, again, about 1,000 things you can do to improve business processes, but there's a lot of them that do not directly contribute to fundamentally closing the gaps in strategy execution. They're important. They can help save, pennies here and there, and pennies across thousands of units sold, or impressions on a website or whatever it is. If you can save pennies over a lot of different transactions like that, that's very important savings for the business, and we certainly need to do those things. But those kinds of incremental improvements are not where the biggest gaps are. The biggest gaps are actually where we're having significant problems with losing market share, with not being able to create the new products that our customers need, with having gaps in customer service. And those are the ones where you need to be taking a bigger step back and looking at the whole system to understand where not enough attention is being focused at the group level. Okay. Excuse me. The solution to this is to build a causal model, or just begin to say build a model, that describes the main parts of the processes that lead to the business results. And I'm going to show you a diagram in a second that'll lay this out. But fundamentally, there's 3 parts to this. Okay, you need to be really clear about what are the actual business results you're trying to accomplish, and what is the competitive advantage that your organization has that enables you to get those results. Essentially, this is what enables you to uniquely make money, relative to your competitors. You need to know what goes on at the enterprise level. Okay, what's taking place at the organization, business unit, team, or work group level that's enabling that performance. And then from there, you can go down and look at what's actually taking place with individual people with individual roles to understand behavior and motivation at the individual level. You need to have all 3 of these parts. And when you can do that, you can then figure out where you want to be focusing your attention to close those gaps in strategy execution. So here is a diagram which shows this. There's no, if you have another one you prefer, it's perfectly fine. I take no pride and ownership here. But this in a fairly simple way summarizes the key things that we need to be able to identify to be able to really understand where things are going well and where they're not in the organization. And this also highlights a key issue around where business leaders tend to focus too much versus where HR tends to focus too much. So HR tends to spend almost all its time in the upper left here, or in the area I'm calling human capital performance, and focusing particularly on issues around competencies, skills, capabilities, and then also on motivation, right? We do all of our employee surveys, we look at how people are happy, what their relationships are like with people they're working with. And so the individual capability and the attitudes and motivation in the upper left is where HR tends to focus, 90% of its efforts and energy. It tends to not focus so much on job design, even though that's a very important part of performance. And in fact, what we find in the work that we do at the center is that oftentimes when companies come to us and they say, we have a problem we're trying to solve around behavior, motivation, or performance, there's always an element of the actual work design that's not being addressed. And then if you do properly address it, you get to much more effective solutions than HR typically does. But HR often doesn't go there because they're not given permission to focus on the job design. Okay. On the flip side, on the business, for the people running the business, they tend to focus all of their efforts on the bottom part of this diagram, on the enterprise performance and the actual business results. So they'll look and they can say, well, we're not accomplishing what we need to in terms of innovation, go-to-market, efficiency, whatever, quality, whatever the metrics you're talking about, and then they'll say, well, just go figure it out, right? They'll delegate down to people, to managers lower down. They'll bring HR in and say, you go figure out the people side of this, without doing an effective enough analysis of what's taking place across all the different parts of the system to see how they relate to each other and then give you the ultimate results that you need. Okay, so this diagram here is the roadmap for the book, and it's also a roadmap for the work that I do and that I train people on all the time to be able to take a more systematic view of what's going on inside your organization. The third challenge, which I've already mentioned, is that there's too much of the focus on individual jobs and behaviors. Okay? There's a lot that we can do to improve things for an individual job or a person. Okay? If I'm in a training department, then I can look at every single job in the company, and I could say, you know, there's training out there that we could do for probably everybody in the company. It'll be different for each person or different for each role, but there is some training out there that would help people be able to do their job better, and that is absolutely a true statement. But the right thing to ask is, where is it that training is the most important intervention that has to take place? Okay? Where is it that it might be helpful, but not necessarily the most important thing? Okay. Same thing around compensation. Okay. There are always things that we can do to improve the way that we pay people, but there also are huge limits in terms of its ability to be able to really attract, retain, and motivate people. Okay. So we know that, in fact, compensation is really good at attraction and retention, but we have a much harder time getting people to be motivated by focusing on compensation. So if we have a motivation and productivity issue and we don't have a retention or attraction issue, then focusing on how to improve compensation, might help, but most likely isn't the most effective solution. Okay. So these are just two examples, but there are many, many more. The basic point is that a lot of what we do to improve things in our organizations are what I call keep the lights on kind of activities. Okay? They're very important for keeping our ongoing operations intact, and if we stop doing them tomorrow, things would fall apart. Right? If we all of a sudden started paying people improperly, if we started recruiting the wrong people, if we started managing our business processes the wrong way, of course things are going to fall apart. Right? So we need to hold managers and leaders accountable for the things that we know we have to do. But that's also where people's comfort zones are, is with existing processes. So figuring out how to do what we're doing just a little bit better is something that people are really good at, but what they tend to be not so good at is being able to take a big step back and say, wow, where is it that our existing processes aren't really working well, and how is that keeping us from accomplishing the larger strategic objectives of the organization? Okay? And in order to figure out what are the kinds of things you need to be doing at the individual level, with individual roles, with people working in individual teams, you've got to take that big step back. Okay? So the challenge, if we get back to the storytelling, so think about the storytelling that we were just talking about a few minutes ago. The top part of this, the top diagram here, lays it out the way that we usually tell the story. Okay, which is that we start, we go from the individual, everybody does their individual job, that then creates performance at the enterprise level, and that then leads to us executing the strategy. But the problem is that if you start with what are the things that we could improve at the job level, or even what are the things we could improve at the group or the business unit level, without making a careful diagnosis of what really needs to change for strategy execution, you can end up boiling the ocean and focusing on lots of things that are nice to have, but not necessarily critical for your strategy execution. So to get there, you've got to turn the analytics all the way around. You need to actually start with, what are the sources of your competitive advantage? What is it that's uniquely enabling you to make money relative to your competitors? And where is it that you're falling short on that? From there, you go to the enterprise analysis of what needs to be done differently at the organization level, including organization design if necessary. And then from there, you'll know what are the areas around human capital that need to be addressed that we can apply the typical kind of HR or HR analytics lens to. Okay. And this is laid out here in this diagram. Okay. So these are the three steps. Okay. You need to start with competitive advantage analytics. From there, you can go to enterprise analytics, and then finally down to human capital analytics. Now, I'm going to pause for a second, because I'm sure that many of the people on this call are coming from HR. If we think about the kinds of stories that are told today all over the place in books, in webinars and TED Talks, wherever you get your source of information, there's tons of analysis, lots of examples out there, more and more growing every day, of how HR analytics is being done. And 99.9% of the time, they all start with stories about HR. They all start with what are the HR processes that we're doing and how can we make them marginally better, and here's the analytics that show us what the ROI is of making this process marginally better. Well, the problem with that is that that's starting and stopping with the bottom part of this diagram. It's just focused on the human capital analytics without necessarily understanding that the change you want to make, the part of the organization you're looking at, the process you want to improve, how that actually relates back to our ultimate sources of competitive advantage and where the organization needs help the most. I don't have a slide on this, but we talk a lot about 3 different kinds of measures of impact, or 3 different kinds of measures of, ways of looking at HR, which is around efficiency, effectiveness, and impact. So there's a lot that we can do to improve the efficiency of what we do in HR. This is the, cost, this is essentially the unit cost for what we're doing, whether it's around training or recruiting or whatever it is. Effectiveness is, are we actually doing what we need to do the way we set out to do it? So if we're trying to differentiate performance, does our performance management system actually provide the right differentiation between the people who really are the top performers versus the bottom performers? Are our reward systems aligned with that? And those kinds of questions are important because if we're not doing those well, then we might want to question why those HR policies are in place in the first place. But we also know from decades of research and practice at this point that you can never design a perfect HR system. You can never design a perfect HR program. So if you're always focusing on how can we make our HR programs better without taking the huge step back and saying what actually matters to the business, you could spend all your time like a dog chasing its tail. You might eventually catch your tail, but that doesn't mean that that's necessarily going to be pushing you in the right direction that you want to be going, which is moving the organization forward. And you can't get there by doing the typical kind of HR analytics that are out there. Okay? The answer is to do it in the order that I've laid out here. Okay, so now I want to kind of dig down a little bit deeper into these different parts. Okay, around competitive advantage analytics. Okay, as mentioned before. Okay, so organizations are large and complex, and one of the biggest problems we have, and this is a fundamental problem on the business side of the house. This is not an HR problem. Okay, there are multiple competing strategic objectives that we have to accomplish. Okay, it's be innovative, but do it at the lowest cost possible. Provide, top-notch customer service, but at the lowest cost possible. Okay, and where you choose your price points, where you choose your compensation, you might want to be a high-quality provider. You don't necessarily want to be the lowest cost provider in your industry, and that's perfectly fine. But even if you say that we're going to be kind of top tier in terms of customer service, in terms of quality, in terms of innovation, there are always limits on how much you can spend on anything. Okay. And your business leaders know this, and that's one of the reasons why there's the annual budgeting process. And in the annual budgeting process, there are very strong assumptions that are made about how you're going to accomplish your strategic objectives. Those get cast in stone around about how much money is allocated to each part of the business and to each process. And those assumptions are built those decisions, the budgeting decisions, are built on very strong assumptions about our ability to be able to get people to produce at the levels that we want for the amount that we're spending. Okay? And this is where the ping pong match happens back and forth anytime we run into problems with executing the strategy. So if we've got an area where we're falling short, the business leaders will say, well, we're paying all this money to people, we're hiring them in, they can't get their job done, you HR go figure it out. HR will often go back and then, try to figure it out, but oftentimes the answer is, well, given the people that we have here, given how much we're paying, this is all that we can afford to accomplish. And then the business will come back and say, well, prove it to me that we can do it differently, and you go back and forth like that. Well, that's where a lot of the fundamental problems lie, is the assumptions that are built into our annual budgeting process around how it is that we can actually accomplish the results that we're trying to get. Okay. And what people can get distracted by is focusing too much on any one of the business objectives. Okay, so we're not doing well in terms of innovation. Okay, we've got to invest a lot more in it, but without knowing if the investments that we're making are going in the right direction. Okay? So the fundamental challenge is how can we get better at running the processes that we have versus knowing where it is that we have to be making exceptions to them and essentially rebuilding, relearning how we do things as an organization to be able to do it differently and better. And that's where a lot of the sources of problems with strategy execution come from. Okay. The challenge is that there is an actual economic cost to anything that we're trying to do, and there's a limit to how much we can actually afford to invest in any process. Now, this is crystal clear to the senior leaders who are running the company because they have to make the decisions about which direction they're going to go in. But the problem is that once decision-making gets handed down to middle-level managers, so if I'm running a manufacturing plant and I'm responsible for key objectives around quality, around uptime, around waste, but I don't have full P&L responsibility for my plant, then I'm always going to push to spend more, and spend past the point where it makes economic sense for the organization to do so. Same thing in HR. If HR doesn't have P&L responsibility for, what it has, for what takes place around people in the organization, it can always advocate for spending more and more and more without a justification for, are you going to get the kind of return out of it? Okay. And this gets played out all the time in terms of the kinds of metrics that we use. So whether it's around customer service, quality, efficiency, time to market, innovation, product features, whatever it is, you'll always find people arguing that we need to get better, better, better on any of those dimensions, but there's an economic cost to it. There's a point at which we reach diminishing marginal returns, and the answer is, you know what, maybe we spend a little bit less on quality, we focus more on customer service. Okay. You have to have the right people at the table to be doing the analysis to say, where is it the organization is going to get the biggest return from making that investment, and putting the analytics behind it to say, okay, what are the kinds of changes that we have to do at the group level, at the individual level, to be able to get to that result. It's the same kind of problem with a lot of the people-oriented metrics that we have. You get a lot of people both in operational roles and in HR roles who will say things like, well, we've got to get turnover down, or we have to improve our safety figures. And the answer is, it depends. I mean, if we have a highly critical role where it's impossible to find people to replace, then absolutely we should get turnover down. If turnover is high, we should get it down. But you reach a certain point where it doesn't make sense to try to make that kind of metric any better. Same thing around safety. I mean, if people are getting killed on the job, then obviously we need, that we want to address that. But you can see this happen sometimes, that you'll get a culture of safety that'll build up, and the culture will overtake what's economically rational. Right, so it makes perfect sense to redesign our systems, to put in better processes, so that we're getting rid of any kind of accidental injuries, particularly ones that would seriously hurt people. But at a certain point, you can't guard against people not holding a handrail if they're walking downstairs in an office building. So the idea that you would want to have a safety culture where you're driving everything to zero just doesn't make sense. People don't like to hear that, but there's a reality around how much we can actually spend and focus our attention on a metric like that, particularly when it's often only tangential, not directly related to achieving the business results. Okay? So the key is knowing where to draw the line. As I mentioned, I'll just go kind of briefly over this. ROI is one of the biggest challenges that we have in organizations, because in order to be able to build competitive advantage, you have to invest, right? And if you're investing, then in the short run, you're actually producing a negative ROI. Okay? So there's a fundamental, I'm blanking here. There's a competition, the kind of fundamental competition between competitive advantage and ROI, because to build competitive advantage, we have to be doing investing, and it's investing with an uncertain return. Okay? If we're trying to get more innovative, if we're trying to get better at our go-to-market systems, if we're trying to get better at customer service, there are some things that we know how to do pretty easily, and there are others that we can't guarantee that if we spend X dollars on this, we're going to get Y percentage return, and that can lead. That's where a lot of the problems with the finance function come up. If it's something that is critical enough for the business leaders will often just turn to finance and say, this is just something we have to do, but you can't necessarily show an ironclad ROI for it, and that's perfectly fine. What I find over and over again is that when I'm working with companies, if you're able to show that what you're doing, whether you're in the business or you're in HR, if what you're doing is helping to fundamentally support the competitive advantage that allows you to uniquely make money, then you often aren't challenged on the kind of spending you want to be doing, as long as you can show that it's going to achieve the results that you want. So I'm just going to briefly go through the other two parts of the analytics. So on the enterprise side, if this looks familiar, these are the different parts that were in that same diagram, the causal model that I showed earlier. For enterprise analytics, there are three different parts you want to be looking at. You want to do diagnostics around the organization design. Are we actually aligned the right way? Around the organizational capability. So what is it that you actually need to be building and maintaining to have your competitive advantage? And what are the parts of the culture that enable or get in the way of you being able to do all of that? So those are the three parts of the enterprise analytics. On the human capital analytics, there are the three parts I already mentioned. So you've got analytics around the job design. So what are the roles and responsibilities for the job? Have we actually set people up for success? Are we supporting them in the right ways? The individual capability, the competencies, knowledge, skills, and abilities around that role, and then the attitudes and motivation people bring to the table. And you have to be looking at all three of those to be doing a comprehensive human capital analysis. One of the biggest challenges we have right now, I should say not what challenges, I'd say one of the biggest opportunities we have right now in organizations is this huge volume of data that seems to be increasing by the day that tell us more and more about what's going on with the people in our organization, with our customers, and there is a lot of gold to be had on that data. The problem is that what big data is really good at doing is taking existing processes, taking existing relationships we have with our customers or potential customers. People might be browsing first, browsing, looking at our online listings, looking at advertisements, doing click-throughs, what they're doing on their mobile phones, where they are when they make purchasing decisions. All of that is incredibly useful information when it comes to marketing, because it can help us to be able to tailor advertising messages and figure out where people are when they're making purchase decisions, right? But the best contribution that makes is to helping us to optimize what we're already doing. So how are we servicing the customers that we already have, the people who are already wanting to be purchasing from us or thinking about purchasing from us? And we can certainly make a lot of money by focusing on those things. I mean, don't get me wrong here, it's very important to do that kind of analysis. The problem is that it's very backward looking. Okay, it takes our existing processes, the existing customers, people who are interacting with us, and asks, how can we do things marginally better to be able to serve them? And this can lead to improvements around efficiency and effectiveness. But if we're talking about how do you fundamentally address the gaps in your strategy, the way you're currently falling short, you're not going to get there by focusing on big data. At the end of the day, big data is a lot about correlational analysis and kind of looking for where things are correlated with each other. But it's not going to actually tell you where the next big thing is going to come from. It's not going to tell you where it is you're falling short in terms of executing your strategy. So, for example, the people who came up with the ideas and then launched Uber, Airbnb, and any of the host of other new companies that are out there that are filling different market niches, they didn't use any kind of big data analysis to figure out what they should be doing. They did traditional, essentially strategy analysis around what are the opportunities that are out there, where are the incumbent companies strong versus weak, and what kinds of market opportunities are there for us to be able to create something new that people haven't done before. It's the same kind of analysis you can do with your existing product line, and you're trying to figure out, how to bring more people in or get them to pay more for what you're doing. Big data analysis can't tell you anything about that. What big data is good at is helping you to refine what you're already doing. Okay? So at the end of the day, hiring more and more data scientists won't really solve the big gaps that you have in strategy execution. And you have to rely on a lot of the more traditional things we know about looking at scenario planning, looking at strategy analysis, and figuring out where the gaps are. And one of the dirty little secrets here, particularly for people who are selling lots of high-powered software programs, is that the best insights probably 8 or 9 times out of 10, the best insights come from doing analysis of using logic and looking at kind of gaps in the market. And there's certainly data that tell us about that. I mean, data on customer buying patterns, data on, who our customers are, what potential customers might look like. All of the data is incredibly important. But you actually don't need high-powered statistics to crunch those numbers to get the insights from them. You just need to evaluate them against what we know around the opportunities for making money in the market. And that doesn't mean high-powered statistics. There are some cases. So if we were to look back, let me just go quickly. Okay. If we're looking at this kind of model of how we produce business results, the kinds of analysis that we apply in terms of statistics versus just simple data analysis, there is almost no statistics that takes place for everything on the bottom part of this model, and sometimes we need high-powered stats for the top left, particularly around motivation, around employee engagement, if we want to understand what people are responding to, but that's about it. So aside from looking at attitudes and motivation, there's almost no area where we need to be applying really high-powered statistics to be able to do the kind of analytics that I'm talking about. So just in case you were listening and thinking, that I'm trying to advocate that we need high-powered statistics here to do the kind of analysis that I'm arguing for, the answer is no for probably 9 times out of 10. So I want to wrap up by giving an example around customer service. So this is going to highlight some of the key issues that are the focus of the book and what I've been talking about here so far. When we talk about customer service, I mean, obviously, customer service is very important for retention, but there's a certain point at which you can go too far, right? I mean, we don't want to invest all of our available, resources just in customer service, because we have to focus also on product quality, on services, on all the things we do to help to create the things that the customers buy from us. And customer service is just one part of it. Okay. Now, how do we know what the right level of customer service is? Well, there are lots of different metrics that are out there, and one of the key issues is how the business actually reacts to those metrics. Okay. So if you see, if you have data on how you're doing with your customer service, and all of a sudden things get worse, right? So you're getting, worse ratings from your customers, that's the kind of metric that business leaders will often jump on and say, we've got to go solve this. But it's really important to take a look. It's really important to take a look at what is going on with the whole system around customer service, and not jump to premature conclusions and say things like, oh, we just got to go hire better people, we've got to pay them more, whatever it might be. And a fundamental problem with the way that we approach addressing customer service is taking responsibility for it and dividing it up across the different parts of the business. Okay, so I've got a leader who's in charge of a call center. They might be focusing on certain metrics around the kinds of experiences people are getting on the phone, but not have full responsibility for what's taking place with the people that are underneath their charge. Okay, and we have to really clear here around what is the kind of role that the business is playing versus the role that HR is playing, and who has responsibility for the different parts of the system. Okay. Now, getting back to the kind of analysis I was talking about earlier, if we think about things in terms of just keeping the lights on, then when it comes to customer service, we're talking about incremental improvements in how we're doing things right now. If we want to really talk about moving the needle, like creating a very different kind of customer service experience, that can be a very important thing to do from a business perspective, but you need to take that big step back and ask, what is it that we're trying to accomplish strategically? How is it that improving customer service can ultimately help with the larger strategic objectives? And that'll tell us whether it's worth investing or not. So, for example, if you're talking about a financial services company like a bank or an investment or venture capital firm, there's different levels of customer service that you have, for different kinds of companies. If I'm a bank, I want to have, there's going to be customer service that I provide for people who just come to us for transactional reasons, just want to be, depositing a little bit of money with us, maybe using ATM. But if somebody doesn't have a really high net worth, then the amount of money the bank can make from them is not very high. And so if you're talking about improving customer service for people in that customer segment, we're talking about doing things that are going to be around technology, making it easier for people to go online, maybe providing, quicker access to somebody in a call center if they have a real significant issue. But customer service there is as much around trying to minimize how much you're spending while still providing a reasonable level of support. It's a very different kind of picture if we're talking about high net worth individuals as customers. So if it's somebody who's got $1 million, invested with different products the bank is offering, then customer service for that kind of a customer is very different, and there often are dedicated customer service representatives, teams who are responsible for fielding their calls, and spending more on those kind of customer-facing roles for the high net worth clients often can have direct impacts that flow directly to the bottom line through increased customer retention, which means their assets stay with you, through them, bringing even more in to invest with you, referring you. You get those same kinds of impacts with people who are the smaller clients, the ones who are just coming and doing, little bits of saving and using the ATM card. But because the bank can't make as much money off of those other customers, you don't get the same conclusion about what does customer service mean in those different cases and where should we be investing our money. Excuse me. So you have to take that step back to ask, what is it the bank is trying to accomplish, and where is it that improving customer service is important, and how is it that it's going to make a difference for the ultimate bottom line performance? The kind of example I was just talking about with a retail bank is an example from a B2C business. So this is where you're selling directly to customers, to retail customers, and the kinds of metrics that we use are around customer complaints, retention, wait times for call centers, net promoter scores, things like that. The kinds of interventions that HR can do are around customer service training, hiring practices, incentives, holding people accountable for different metrics, and how do you link those metrics to their compensation. If we're talking about just kind of keeping the lights on and making marginal improvements in customer service, then we can focus on those kinds of HR interventions. Where is it that we can have a little bit of a training? Where is it we can be bringing in better candidates, et cetera? Okay. The challenge, though, is that if we want to be saying, where is it that customer service is going to make a real contribution to the business, you have to take that larger step back, like I was doing a minute ago, with asking, what is the role of customer service for the different kinds of customer of the bank? Okay, you can do this in any business, in any B2C business that you're talking about. Okay, and at that point, you're then talking about, well, what kinds of IT systems are we putting in place? What are the overall staffing levels we're talking about, so that maybe we're reducing wait times or increasing customer contact with a human being as opposed to just a computer voice. How much are we willing to spend on the different roles that are working in different parts of the business? Those are the kinds of larger organization design questions that are critical to ask when you're looking at these questions on customer service. And even if you're sitting in a frontline HR role, or you're a frontline manager, where you're being tasked with saying, well, we've got to get better customer service here, you still need to take the systems approach for asking, well, why is it that I've got the hand that I've been dealt? Why is it that we've got people working here who've got the set of competencies that they do? Why are we paying them as much as we are? Because a lot of those answers are going to tell you what the ultimate sources are of people doing their job well or not when it comes to customer service. And even if you haven't been given permission to say we should redesign the jobs, we should spend more on the people that we're hiring, do things differently like that, even if you haven't been given permission, you still want to do that kind of analysis so that you can be honest with the organization. Okay? The trap that we often fall into is assuming that, well, if I can't redesign the job, if I can't argue that we should pay people a lot more, then I'm just going to have to go solve the problem with the tools that I have at my disposal. That's exactly where we end up with the nice-to-have solutions as opposed to the ones that are actually critically important for the organization. Similar kinds of issues on the on the B2B side. We get, the metrics can be somewhat similar, but let me jump down to the bottom here. Okay, a big contrast with a B2C business is that in B2B, we're talking about people who are working typically on pretty large accounts. Okay, so if I'm in a B2B business, I'm selling to my customers are the ones who ultimately then would sell to the public, and these often are corporate purchasing teams. They can be very large. The question around customer service in this case is not just around customer retention and loyalty and how much are they buying from us, but it can even be decisions around pricing, right? So the people who are on those customer management teams in a B2B business are often given at least some control over pricing, because making the customer happy can be as much about the overall deal of what they're getting in terms of quantity and quality and service, but price as well. So the analysis in this case, you want to include that to say, well, who has ultimate responsibility for pricing? Does it rely enough with the people who are being charged with customer service? If not, what are the kinds of changes you'd want to make to be able to have it be managed better? So that's the end of my prepared remarks. I apologize for using up almost all the time, but I will pause here and see if people have any questions.
Alec, we have 2 questions in the chat box. The first is from Norm Katz, who says the solution to challenge 1 requires an aggregation of multiple systems. Due to the complexity of this type of effort, both technically and politically, what are some examples of success?
Okay, well, thank you, Norm. So in the short amount of time we have, I can't give you a long answer. I will say that there's some specific examples I have in the book, and I'll just kind of give one pretty quickly right now. You don't necessarily need to aggregate over a lot of different things, but you need to take the big step back and ask what it is you're trying to accomplish for the organization. So one example in work that I did with Frito-Lay a number of years ago, there was a question around retention, around motivation for their sales drivers, and as it was framed, the initial question was, well, is there something we should do around compensation? And we took a look at compensation, but we also took a look at what was going on in the whole system and came up with, with an answer that it was both and. So there were definitely things that needed to improve on compensation, but by looking at the whole job design and looking at what they were trying to accomplish with that job in terms of their go-to-market strength and where they got the bulk of their revenues, the answers that came out were a lot more than just compensation. It also came down to how the job was structured, what kinds of roles and responsibilities they had for people who were working 5 days a week on a route versus working the other 2 days, what they were doing in terms of optimizing capacity for the trucks that they were driving. So the business leaders had this initial idea around compensation, but in fact, there were a lot more other pressing issues that were also that they also were worried about, but they didn't link them back to compensation because they weren't looking at it systematically enough. So and that was what we were able to do working together. What's the next question?
The next one is from Catherine Simpson. She asks, how might these principles be applied in an academic or higher education setting with faculty governance?
To that, I would say good luck. No, but all joking aside, I mean, if you're talking about for any institution to get to function well, the key is you need to be focused on what are the actual objectives. I would say that for faculty, the biggest problem is that the organizational objective is high-quality education for students, but the problem is that faculty are not incented, they're not compensated and motivated, at least in research, universities. They're not primarily compensated and rewarded for teaching, and that leads to some of the fundamental problems. But you can see that within the context of the model that I laid out, where you have, essentially you've got competing priorities, and the priorities are between what the faculty want to accomplish for their own careers versus what the organization needs them to do to service the client, or the customer, which is a student. Any other questions people might have?
That's all I see in the chat box for now, but we could give it another minute just to make sure.
Okay. I will take it back to the model. So while we're pausing, I will also encourage people, I'll just give a little plug. So the other book that I have coming out in January is called What Millennials Want from Work. I co-wrote it with Jennifer Deal from the Center for Creative Leadership. Since I know that everyone on this call is interested in kind of analytics and getting to fact versus fiction, I think you'll find that book of interest as well, because we address a lot of challenges around myths around what the millennials want, and bring a lot of data to the table to actually show what it is they want, and what that means for organizations. I think you'll find a lot of validation of some things you believe to be true, and some things you didn't necessarily know were the case. And what we paint is a much more complex picture of who they are and what it means to engage with them. So I definitely encourage you to take a look at that when it comes out in January.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Oh, sorry, Lacey.
Go ahead, Carrie.
There's one last question from Norm. He asks how IT plays in your model.
So IT is an integral part of the model, okay, but it is unless you are a technology organization, it's an enabler. So there are versions. I mean, depending on the audience that I'm talking to, if I'm talking to HR, I will often put up on the slide, I'll say, where is it that HR has an impact? And HR is, usually focusing on individual capability or attitudes or motivation. For IT is about enabling our systems to work better. Okay, so it will more often be playing out at the level of the enterprise performance around, what is it we're actually trying to accomplish in our different work groups? Where is it that the technology enables us to be able to do things better and more efficiently? And where is it the technology is an important contribution, but isn't necessarily the most important thing. And if it's not the most important thing, then the responsibility of the IT function is to provide systems that are good enough to get the work done. But at a certain point, you hit the point of diminishing marginal returns, and the argument for improvements in IT versus improving in other parts of the work process often will shift over to the other work processes, and IT at that point is, helpful for keeping the lights on, but not necessarily kind of a key thing to be addressed around to close the gaps in strategy execution.
Perfect. Well, with that, Alec, I would like to say thank you so much for your time in joining this call today, and thank you for each of the participants that have listened in. If you have follow-on questions or would like to engage with Alec to continue the conversation, feel free to reach out to me, and again, this is Lacey, or the center overall. You can call the main line, and we're happy to set up a time to chat, or if you need additional information, just let us know. And we look forward to having you join us at Alec's upcoming public program. And thank you again for all of your time and joining us today. Have a great afternoon, and we look forward to staying in touch. Happy holidays.
Thank you.